But first, now in just a few hours, China and the United States will sign phase 1 of a new trade deal. And it's the first step towards ending their long trade war. The agreement is set to deal with thorny issues like intellectual property, technology transfer and currencies. And there will also be a commitment from China to buy $200 billion worth of U.S. exports over the next 2 years. The Trump administration says all aspects of the deal will be revealed once it is signed at the White House. So let's hear from Olivia Seong, and she is in Beijing right now. So Olivia, has Beijing made any comments on the upcoming signing agreement so far?
Well, you know, we've seen the U.S. quite keen to talk about this mini deal, revealing some of the details that have gone into the agreement. But on the other hand, China has been relatively cautious and has not revealed too much in the lead up to the signing that's to take place in a few hours. And that's possibly because, you know, over this past year and a half, we have seen many surprises as this trade war has gone on between these two huge economies. And so, you know, we have not really heard much from Beijing in terms of further details about the agreement so far. One of the things that has been discussed in reports is how much China is planning to buy from the U.S. And reports have said that China has agreed to buy an additional $200 billion worth of U.S. products, which also includes agricultural goods, manufactured goods, energy and services as well. But China has not only not confirmed how much it is planning to buy from the U.S., it has also not detailed how it intends to buy more U.S. goods. And some experts are saying that there are some questions that remain on how China plans to meet its pledge and achieve these relatively high targets, as it will also mean having to divert some of its imports from other countries to the U.S. Now, another thing that is part of the deal is on currency, and the U.S. has said that as part of the deal, China has agreed to refrain from intentionally devaluing its currency. And yesterday, we saw the U.S. remove the currency manipulator label from China. Now, China has said that, you know, while this is seen as a goodwill move from the U.S., this is something that the U.S. should not have done in the first place back in August. As it says that it was never a currency manipulator, and it has made clear in its editorials that it has never resorted to competitive currency devaluation, rather, or used its currency as a tool in the trade frictions. But nonetheless, in the editorials, if it can be seen as a signal from the Chinese authorities, China is saying that it welcomes the move, and the removal of the currency manipulator label as well as the mini deal is seen as a positive step, and is being described as a new beginning for the bilateral relationship. And it adds that, you know, any sort of consultation moving forward will have to take place on the basis of equality and mutual respect.
Okay, speaking of this new beginning, how much of a reprieve would today's signing bring to businesses in China?
Well, China has said from the start, when it announced this phase 1 trade deal with the U.S., that this will benefit the country and its people domestically here in China as well. And so, for example, when it comes to buying more U.S. goods, China has said that this will benefit and help to meet its domestic demand. We also have to remember that this is also coming as China's economy is slowing, and it's seeing its slowest growth in close to 3 decades. And so, yes, it will be a reprieve with this easing of tensions with the U.S. But tariff-wise, while we've seen new duties that were supposed to be placed on Chinese goods back in December had been cancelled by the U.S. as they announced this phase 1 trade deal, we have to remember that there are still billions of dollars worth of tariffs placed on both Chinese and U.S. goods. And so this is still very much a factor in play. And U.S. officials have said that this will remain in place until at least the November elections, or if both countries move to seal a phase 2 follow-up agreement. Another issue are the structural changes that the U.S. has taken issue with China over, and is what started this whole tit-for-tat tariffs that have been, imposed by these two countries. And, one issue that has not been addressed in this mini deal are China's industrial subsidy scheme for its state-owned enterprises, which the U.S. sees as being unfair. That has been pushed to phase 2 of negotiations, but certainly these will be much more difficult to resolve, also because China sees this as being part of its national interest. And some experts I've spoken to say even though this is phase 1 deal is seen as an easing of tensions, Chinese companies here are taking no chances. They do foresee that the China-U.S. relationship will continue to be tense, not just over trade, but in other sectors, for example, in technology, or whether it comes to Hong Kong, Taiwan, or the South China Sea. The relationship is still expected to have many hot points, and so Chinese companies here are making contingency plans to be prepared for what is to come.
All right, thanks for that. Olivia Song speaking to us from Beijing. So let's bring in Kate Fisher, who's been following the trade deal from Washington now. Kate, farmers still on edge despite news of the deal. What can the people and businesses expect from this signing of the trade deal?
Yeah, I think farmers, although some of them are cautiously optimistic about all of this, they still haven't actually seen the text of the deal, and many of them are concerned about whether China will actually stick to what it is apparently promised. They have been at the brunt of some of these tariffs, particularly soybean farmers, which have seen much of their market wiped out through these tariffs. They also have a concern that in the interim, while the tariffs have been on their products, that China has found new supply chains in countries like Brazil and Argentina. And some of these farmers are concerned about whether China will actually change tack and stick to the terms of the deal. Of course, the White House is saying there are enforcement clauses in this and that these farmers shouldn't be concerned, but there is still some concern there from many. Of course, those who are hardcore President Trump supporters are very much celebrating over this and believe that this will work out whatever. There are concerns, of course, as well from other businesses, not just farmers, because although there is a great incentive for the farmers with this $40 to $50 billion extra of purchasing by China, billions of dollars of tariffs still remain on many other areas of industry, and those manufacturers here in the US who rely on those components and so on from China are very concerned because their area of business is still very much part of this trade dispute, and they still have no end in sight for that because the president himself has said he doubts that this will all get sorted out before the election in November. So although there is some joy for farmers, there is still heavy concern for many other industries here.
All right, speaking of the election, so President Donald Trump now, we know that he's already been touting the trade deal at campaign rallies. So question is, how important is it to his re-election bid come November on this trade deal?
Well, it is to him vital because he really needs a concrete achievement, as you say, to talk about, boast about on these campaign rallies. He was on the stump last night here in the US, and the China trade deal was one of the big things that he was talking about what an amazing achievement it was for farmers as well as the rest of the country. Also, the boast that he is the only president, the only person who has been brave enough to stand up to China. He says that previous administrations have allowed them to walk all over them, and that he is the one that has stood up to them and got a result. And that will resonate with many voters. Of course, his hardcore supporting base will this is another thing for them to tout him for. But for those that perhaps on the fence, there will be those that really have been concerned about the rise of China, and they will see this as a positive for Donald Trump. But you also have to remember there are those other industries I was talking about who still are suffering the effects of these harsh tariffs. Also, some of the farming community, although they're delighted by this phase 1 trade deal, assuming it does do what it says it will, there are concerns about what those previous tariffs have done to their business, and will the Chinese keep to the terms of the new deal. There are still those concerns amongst some of those farmers, and I think until they feel that their purchases are going up, their order books are filling up again, then I think there will still be some unease in some rural communities. And of course, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, states like that that only marginally came through for Trump in 2016. There are many farmers, many of these industries are based there, and Donald Trump really needs to make sure that he has secured those votes to ensure that they stay with him in 2020.
All right, thanks for that. Kate Fisher speaking to us from Washington, and in a few hours we will see the exact text of this trade agreement and how much of it will actually ease the trade tensions between the U.S. and Beijing.